So anyway, we'll get right started to it. We're going to read a bunch of scriptures today. We're going to be talking about the bread of heaven. And what I wanted to do today was start with the unleavened aspect of it because we're coming at the end of 50 days from sometime in the middle of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And we're going to connect that into the Feast of Leavened Bread, if we want to call it, because we know that for Shavuot, you're presenting two leavened loaves of bread. I have my handy dandy matzah here as a visual aid. We'll get to that in a minute. But I want to start off reading in Matthew 13:33. This is in that section of parables. If I can get turned to it, we'll be doing good. Matthew 13:13, or 13:33, sorry. Matthew 13:33. Where'd it go? One more page. All right. He spoke another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened. Now, my New American Standard there says pecks. Some translations will say measure. Some will say, I forget what the other terms are. But the idea is that she's taking this flour, she's dividing it into 3 parts, and she's adding leaven to it until the whole thing is leavened. Now, I could not do this teaching without my wife teaching me about how sourdough works. So now that I have an idea of how to make sourdough bread, all the dots are connected here. So hopefully that knowledge will come in useful as we progress through this. So this woman is taking 3 measures of flour and she's putting leaven in it until the whole thing is leavened. And I think, personally, we'll get to this in a minute, but there's a reason why he said 3. He could have said 4, he could have said 2, he could have said 12, a nice biblical number, maybe 7, but instead he says 3. And I think that's significant. So just something to keep in mind as we progress through this. But I first want to take a look at what does leaven represent? Because this woman is taking leaven and putting it in this flour until the whole thing is leavened. So we'll turn over a couple pages to Matthew 16. And we will read verses 1 through 12. This is what the Pharisees, they're testing, they're poking and prodding like they typically do. The Pharisees and Sadducees came up, and testing Yahshua, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied to them, "When it is evening, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'There will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening.' Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given it, except for the sign of Jonah." And he left them and went away. And the disciples came to the other side of the sea, but they had forgotten to bring any bread. And Yahshua said to them, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." So just to pause real quick, I love how he does these things. It's almost a random moment. They just came off of this Pharisees testing him. Now they're out of bread, and he just throws this statement in there all casually. Oh, like, by the way, watch out for this leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Which I like to say the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, which is why they were sad, you see. So anyway, kids love that one. They began to discuss this among themselves, verse 7, saying, "He said that because we did not bring any bread." But Yahshua, aware of this, said, "You men of little faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets full you picked up?" So this is after the feeding of the thousands. "Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets full you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And we've got parallel accounts of this in the other Gospels. There's one version where he talks about the leaven of Herod. But I think it's interesting because, in my time in the Messianic Hebrew roots, Torah, whatever we want to call it these days, the predominant teaching that I have heard about what does leaven symbolize is that leaven symbolizes sin. So when we get to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the idea is that we're really hunkering down on the internal examination. We're trying to identify where the sin is in our life and try to remove it. And that's a great thing to do. using leaven equals sin as a way to, mentally prepare ourselves to kind of hunker down and get rid of things in our life that don't belong there is a valuable thing. But I do think it's interesting that, the Bible itself, and you can do a word study on this all through the New Testament. Whenever leaven comes up symbolically, it's almost always doctrine or teaching. There's nothing in there that really says, that says in black and white terms that leaven equals sin. Although we can use it that way in our thinking as a useful tool, it's always doctrine or teaching. So that's going to be kind of the focus of this teaching, I guess, is how that works with this whole bread thing. So let's go to Deuteronomy 4. Deuteronomy 4. We're going to read a good chunk of scripture here. Deuteronomy 4. We're going to read verses 1 through 40. And because we are reading a bunch of scripture to keep it streamlined, I'm just going to read it all. That way we don't have to pass the mic around. Normally, I love to do that, but just for the sake of brevity today. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 1 through 40. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I am teaching you to perform, so that you may live and go in and take possession of the land which Yahweh, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I am commanding you, nor take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your God which I command you. Your eyes have seen what Yahweh has done in the case of Baal Peor. For all the men who followed Baal Peor, Yahweh your God has destroyed them from among you. But you who held fast to Yahweh your God are alive today, every one of you. See, I have taught you, here's that teaching again, statutes and judgments, just as Yahweh my God commanded me, that you should do thus in the land where you are entering to possess it. So keep and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has an Elohim so near to it, as is Yahweh our Elohim, whenever we call on him? Or what great nation is there that has statutes and judgments as righteous as this whole law, this whole Torah, which I am setting before you today? Only give heed to yourself and keep your soul diligently, so that you do not forget the things which your eyes have seen, and they do not depart from your heart all the days of your life, but make them known to your sons and your grandsons. Of course, we know that that would be by teaching them. Verse 10, remember the day that you stood before Yahweh your God at Horeb, when Yahweh said to me, assemble the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens. Darkness, cloud, and thick gloom. Then Yahweh spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form, only a voice. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, that is, the 10 Commandments, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might perform them in the land where you are going over to possess it. So watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form on the day Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, so that you do not act corruptly and make a graven image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water below the earth. And beware not to lift up your eyes to heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which Yahweh your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace from Egypt to be a people for his own possession as today. Now Yahweh was angry with me, this is Moses talking, on your account, and swore that I would not cross the Jordan, and that I would not enter the good land which Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance. For I will die in this land, I shall not cross the Jordan, but you shall cross the Jordan and take possession of this good land. So watch yourselves, that you do not forget the covenant of Yahweh your God, which he made with you, and make for yourselves a graven image in the form of anything against Yahweh your God has commanded you. For Yahweh your God is a consuming fire, a jealous Elohim. When you become the father of children and children's children, and have remained long in the land, and act corruptly, and make an idol in the form of anything, and do that which is evil in the sight of Yahweh your Elohim, so as to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will surely perish quickly from the land where you're going over the Jordan to possess it. You shall not live long on it, but you will be utterly destroyed. Yahweh will scatter you among the peoples, and you'll be left few in number among the nations where Yahweh drives you. There you will serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. But from there you will seek Yahweh your God, and you will find him, if you search for him with all your heart and all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things that come upon you in the latter days, which could presumably be now, you will return to Yahweh your Elohim and listen to his voice. For Yahweh your Elohim is a compassionate Elohim. He will not fail you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant with your fathers which he swore to them. Indeed, ask now concerning the former days which were before you, since the day that Elohim created man on the earth, and inquire from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything been done like this great thing, or has anything been heard like it? Has any people heard the voice of Elohim speaking from the midst of the fire, as you have heard of, and survived? Or has a God tried to go and take for himself a nation from within another nation by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, as Yahweh your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that Yahweh, he is Elohim, there is no other besides him. Out of the heavens he let you hear his voice to discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words from the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and he personally brought you from Egypt by his great power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, as to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is today. Know therefore today, and take it to your heart, that Yahweh, he is God in heaven above and on the earth below, there is no other. So you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I am giving you today, that it may go well with you and your children after you, that you may live long in the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you for all time. So I wanted to read that good chunk of scripture there because this idea of teaching happened in there several times. And it's this idea, I like how Brad Scott used to talk about the whole mountaintop thing. He would do it in terms of words, but the idea that the word, if it's like rain, it starts off at the top of the mountain pure. And as it comes down the mountain, it picks up debris, it picks up stones, it picks up dirt. And by the time it gets down where we're at, in modern times with our factories and our, rail cars overturning near the Ohio River and all this craziness, it's not anywhere near the purity that it was at the mountaintop. It's highly polluted. So teaching should be the same way. If we do our job, teaching should trickle down from Yahweh like it did through Moses. And of course, we know the history. It was to go out to people through the Levites. That didn't work out quite so well long term. Um, but the idea is that we want to keep that teaching as pure as possible so that we can live long in the land where Yahweh promises us, which ultimately we know that's going to be the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. Um, okay, so to continue, now we're going to hop back into the New Testament, or I like to say the Newer Testament, because when you say New Testament, it almost gets interpreted like it replaced the old one. I think the old one's just as good as the new one, personally. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. I went to 2 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 5. It is actually reported, and I would hate to get a letter like this from Paul. It is actually reported that there is immorality among you, an immorality of such a kind as does not exist even among the Gentiles, the nations, that someone has his father's wife. Of course, we know that that's forbidden in the Torah, and I think it's actually called an abomination. You have become arrogant and have not mourned instead, so that the one who had done this deed would be removed from your midst. For I, on my part, though absent in body but present in spirit, have already judged him who has so committed this, as though I were present. In the name of our Master Yahshua, when you are assembled, and I with you in spirit, with the power of our Master Yahshua, I have decided to deliver such a one over to Satan, or the adversary, for the destruction of his flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of our Master Yahshua. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough? And this is kind of, if we slow down and read this, there's an interesting thing here that we're going to try to pull out. Remember, the best we can tell from the New Testament, Leaven is more representative of teaching or doctrine. So a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Yahshua, for our Messiah, our Passover has also been sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, but with the covetous and swindlers, or with the covetous and swindlers, or with idolaters. For then you would have to go out of the world. But actually, I wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are within the assembly? But those who are outside, Elohim judges. Remove the wicked man from among yourselves. So there's an issue there in Corinth, and the people are not dealing with it. It's a pretty depraved thing that's going on, and they're allowing it to happen, apparently. And Paul is warning them that a little leaven leavens a whole lump. And if we're looking at teaching, we're looking at doctrine. This is all directed within the body of believers. And we are in the body of believers because of teaching and because of doctrine. We're adhering to certain things and hopefully acting upon them. So the idea is that we've got this conflict of teaching or doctrine that these immoral people in the body are adhering to that's causing them to trend in towards sin. And Paul is admonishing the body to move away from that, separate that. Now, if we think about bread in verse 7, this is what I think is interesting. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump. Any of you women, or maybe even some men who have made bread, is it possible, once you introduce that yeast, to pull it out of the bread? I'm thinking it not. I mean, maybe if you had like a high-tech laboratory with all kinds of, I don't know, centrifuges or whatnot, maybe you could pull that leaven out of there. But for the rest of us that don't have that, once we put that leaven in that bread, it's staying in the bread. It's not going anywhere except for maybe in our bellies if it turns out well. Which, by the way, we had some fabulous challah last night. My belly's still thinking about that one. Okay, but Paul is telling us to do just that. He's telling us to do something that's almost impossible. Clean out the old leaven, or say, clean out the old teaching, clean out the old doctrine. And so we know that this whole thing that we're stuck in the midst here is this battle basically between two kingdoms, the kingdom of this world and the kingdom of our God. And they're at war with each other. There's a conflict. We can't be in the middle. If we're lukewarm, we'll get spit out of his mouth. Nobody wants that. A lukewarm bath, I've had them before, they're no fun. You guys probably have too. So lukewarm is not good. Unless you're Luke and you like to be warm, that's probably the one exception. Anyway, but Paul is asking us to remove this old leaven, and then he calls us unleavened. So in the same sentence, he's saying that we, or the people in Corinth at least, are unleavened, but then he's telling them to remove the old leaven. And it's almost this paradox if we slow down and break it down, but we tend to kind of read through it and just kind of move on. And then he tells the people, and I wish our brothers and sisters out there in the mainstream could see this, therefore let us celebrate the feast. But Paul said, let's celebrate the feast, right? I'm going to listen to Paul on this one and celebrate the feast. We did this year, but we'll do it again next year. And we'll do it again and again and again every year because it's amazing. But then he tells us, not with the old leaven, not with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Of course, truth is facts. Truth is information that can be taught. Okay, sincerity can't really be taught, but it can be modeled. A sincere parent can model that sincerity to their children. Malice and wickedness can also be taught in a way. You can teach doctrine and teaching that leads to malice and wickedness. You have extreme examples. If you go back to the World War II era, you had this whole idea of, anti-Semitism run amok with the Nazis. And it wasn't just anti-Semitism. They were anti-handicapped, anti-gypsies, cripples. I mean, anything, right? But that was a teaching. That was a doctrine. That was information that was being taught to the people. And of course, they weren't the only ones. Every culture throughout time has had some variation of that, where there's a group that is targeted as the enemy, but the malice and the wickedness comes as a result of the teaching. And then people buy into that teaching, they believe the teaching, and ultimately it warps their thinking, it corrupts their heart, and then we have action, unfortunately. So Paul is admonishing us to clean out that old teaching, that old doctrine. He says we're unleavened, which would mean that we're untaught if we follow this line here. And then he tells us to get rid of this bad leaven. Okay. And then he starts talking about like don't associate with immoral people. And my wife is fond of saying that bad morals corrupt good morals or good behavior. You say it differently sometimes. It's the idea that if I have a really good person and I put them in a group of bad people, it's not likely that that one good person is going to influence the bad people. The bad people are probably going to influence that one person. That's sadly how it works in this fallen world. So we kind of have an uphill battle here to get rid of this bad doctrine, this bad leaven, and replace it with the good leaven. And I like to call it the leaven from heaven because it rhymes and it's easy to remember. But I think that if we're going to get rid of the bad teaching, we need to replace it with good teaching. We need to replace it with kingdom teaching. And that's what we're going to talk about as we go through this. So now we're going to take a look at some examples in the physical of actual unleavened bread and when it was done. Now that we know that leaven represents doctrine and teaching, we know that Paul wants us to get rid of the bad stuff. He wants us to be unleavened. But if we're going to have the leaven of heaven, ideally, I think we want to go from unleavened as far as the world's teaching to fully leavened as far as the kingdom teaching. I think that's the goal here. So let's go and let's take a look at the unleavened bread. Let's go to Genesis 18. We've got two back-to-back chapters here where unleavened bread is mentioned, and it's really fascinating to me. And we read in Matthew 13 earlier how this woman took leaven and she put it into 3 measures of fine flour until it was all leavened. And the only other time I can find in the whole scriptures where somebody took 3 groups or 3 measures of flour and did anything with it is what we're about to read. So I think, if you have something that specific, like I said earlier, Messiah could have said 4 measures of flour or 2 measures of flour or 12, but he said 3. And so I think he's connecting it back here. So Genesis 18, this is when the birth of Isaac is promised. Now Yahweh appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And he said, My master, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent of Sarah and said quickly, Prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. We're going to pause for just a minute here. She's taking 3 measures of flour, so 3 parts of flour, and she's making unleavened bread cakes. We read in the Exodus account, it calls the unleavened bread the bread of haste. And so I'm thinking this is an unexpected visit. Okay, Yahweh and these 2 other people accompanying him, which we find out later, or the angels that go visit Sodom, they just show up. Abraham and Sarah are unprepared for this. They don't have bread in the oven that's been rising for 3 hours or whatever, and then they're going to have these beautiful, rich challah loaves. They don't have that going on because this is unexpected. So I think what she probably did was, and we can sort of visualize it here. If I was a woman, and it's 2023, so I have to say I'm not a woman. Um, if I imagine that I took 3 little batches of flour, maybe in bowls or on the table, and I mixed them up with some water, maybe I put some oil in it, and I just made some dough and just put it on a griddle or something, I would end up with something like this, except for hopefully tastier. And my wife makes awesome unleavened bread, so her bread is not the bread of affliction; it's the bread of addiction. So, um, but anyway, I think she was basically making 3 unleavened bread cakes, one for each of these 3 guests. Okay. And so if we go back to this whole idea of Matthew 13, the kingdom of heaven is like a woman who took leaven and put it in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. Well, this is 3 measures of unleavened bread that she's making. Okay. And she's going to give it to Yahweh. Let's just keep reading. Okay, so this is verse 7. Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. And this to me is a verse that very specifically says we can have cheeseburgers. We can have cheese and meat together. I know that that's not a thing for the group here. We all like our cheeseburgers, but it's a thing out there. You can't have meat and cheese. Well, that's what's being served to Yahweh here himself by Abraham. So, um, anyway, so verse 9. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" He said, "There in the tent," as if they didn't already know. He said, "I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my master being old also?" And Yahweh said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I'm so old? Is anything too difficult for Yahweh? At the appointed time I will return to you. At this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, however, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "No, but you did laugh." She got busted. When the men rose up from there and looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off, Yahweh said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him." So Yahweh knows that Abraham is going to command his children. That's another way of teaching. He's going to teach his children Yahweh's righteous ways. Verse 20. And Yahweh said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed very great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if any have done, to see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know." Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before Yahweh. And then this is where he has his little dialogue with Yahweh, and he's trying to negotiate. He's trying to get Sodom off the hook. If there's just a few righteous people there, will you let them go? Okay, we'll skip that part for now. But it's interesting here that Yahweh shows up with these two people. We might call them two witnesses. That'll come in a little bit later. And so he's making this meal for them, including these three pieces of bread. And I believe it also talks about, where was it here? No, it doesn't say it there. We'll read that maybe later. Okay, anyway, so I think Matthew 13 is tracking back to this. And so if Matthew 13 is basically a little short snippet of what the kingdom growth is going to look like start to finish, we're looking at the beginning of it here. And we know that ultimately, if we let the text explain itself, the Mosaic covenant, or what we call the Old Covenant, it says right in the words there that the purpose of it was to fulfill the covenant with Abraham. And if we get into our new covenant language, if we can break out of Jeremiah 31, 31 and look at the overall context, the purpose of the new covenant as well is to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. They kind of do it in different things, different ways, but that's the same ultimate purpose. So we're establishing a kingdom. We're growing a kingdom. We're establishing it. So then we go to Exodus 12. Oh no, I'm sorry. We got to do Genesis 19 first. Okay, so Yahweh did his negotiating. There's not enough righteous people in there to spare them, so now it's on. So chapter 19. Now the two angels, we know that these two people that were with Yahweh are angels. They came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, "Now behold, my masters, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet, that you may rise early and go on your way." They said, however, "No, but we'll spend the night in the square." Yet he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So again, this idea of Lot has these unexpected visitors. He apparently doesn't have risen bread that he can just pop in the oven for half an hour, however long it takes, and make these nice bread. He's making flat cakes for them. He's making flat bread because it's a quick and easy thing, and it's going to be really tasty if he does it right. And so back to back here, and this is the same, this is just within like a day or two max. We have Abraham and Sarah making unleavened bread for Yahweh and these two angels, and then they go down the road to Lot, and Lot is having unleavened bread making for them. And if we look at the timing of this, this is early spring. This is right around Passover time. So it seems like, the unleavened bread Passover spring connection is not something that originated in Exodus 12. It's been a theme that Yahweh kind of always had going. He didn't always like articulate it in a way that, as a commandment up until we get into the Exodus. But it seems like he's associating it even before that. And we're going to find out here that unleavened bread, the bread of haste, is often associated with Exodus because Lot's about to undergo his own Exodus here. Um, okay, so Okay, verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom surrounding the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. I'm going to skip this part for a minute to keep it kid friendly here. But let's go down to, let's see here. Let's go down to verse 9. But they said, stand aside. These guys really want to do what they want to do. They said, stand aside. Furthermore, they said, this one came in as an alien, as a stranger, and already he's acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. So they pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. But the men, these two angels, they reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. So there's a slight, almost little Passover theme here. These guys that are outside the door are about to get judged, and these angels are bringing Lot into the house. They're bringing him through that threshold into the house where it's safe. It's almost like a proto Passover in a way. Um, okay, so where verse 11. They struck the men who were at the doorway at the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. Then the two men said to Lot, whom else have you here? As if they don't know. A son in law, and your sons and your daughters, and whomever you have in this city, bring them out of this place. For we're about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before Yahweh that Yahweh has sent us to destroy it. And with Passover, we have the destroyer coming. It's the same kind of idea. Verse 14. Lot went out and spoke to his sons in law who were to marry his daughters and said, up, get out of this place, for Yahweh will destroy the city. But he appeared to his sons to be jesting, because that's totally the kind of thing you joke about, right? When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his two daughters, for the compassion of Yahweh was upon them. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, my masters. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you've shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it's small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small? That's the actual name of the town. It means small, that my life may be saved. He said to him, behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which he has spoken. And then we have, Lot going out. Sarah looks back. She turns into, some salt, and the whole thing happens. But the idea here is that unleavened bread is happening here, and it's associated with a type of the Exodus. Okay, it's even to the point to where if we think of the actual Exodus, from Egypt, Yahweh sent two witnesses, Moses and Aaron, before Pharaoh, and they were pronouncing the judgments on Egypt. And Yahweh spared his people who would come inside the house. Okay, so we kind of have that idea going on here, but that's unleavened bread. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that because this whole idea of a kingdom has to start somewhere. You have to be brought out of one kingdom, which in Lot's case was Sodom, or in our forefathers of Israel, the case was Egypt. You have to be brought out of one kingdom to be brought into another. So let's go to Leviticus 2. Now we're going to take a look at grain offerings. And because we're not talking about just unleavened bread here, we're talking about the bread of heaven is the overall theme. So we're looking at things that are connected to bread, things that are connected to what bread is made out of, which is grain. Of course, you can have barley, you can have wheat, you can have spelt, you can have all kinds of stuff. Leviticus 2, let's get there. I don't know if I'll read the whole chapter or not, but it's short. Now, when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to Yahweh, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. And he shall then bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, and shall take from it his handful of the fine flour and of its oil and all of its frankincense. And the priest shall offer it up in smoke as a memorial portion on the altar, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to Yahweh. So the priest is taking some of this aromatic flour and he's just tossing it in the fire. It had to have smelled amazing. Um, then what we have here, verse 3, the remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy, of the offerings to Yahweh by fire. So because it belongs to Aaron and his sons, this is fine flour. Maybe they'll make bread out of it at some point. It doesn't really say what they're going to do with it. But I imagine bread with frankincense in it. I don't think if anybody's ever tasted that before. I wonder if it's delicious or if it's kind of strange because they're putting the frankincense in with the flour, it seems like. Verse 4, now when you bring an offering of a grain offering baked in an oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. If your offering is a grain offering made on a griddle, it shall be of fine flour, unleavened, mixed with oil. You shall break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a grain offering. Now, if your offering is a grain offering made in a pan, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. When you bring in the grain offering which is made of these things to Yahweh, it shall be presented to the priest, and he shall bring it to the altar. The priest then shall take up from the grain offering its memorial portion, and shall offer it up in smoke on the altar as an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to Yahweh. The remainder of the grain offering belongs to Aaron and his sons, a thing most holy of the offerings to Yahweh by fire. No grain offering which you bring to Yahweh shall be made with leaven. And this is important. If you're offering a grain offering, you cannot have leaven in it. So these beautiful loaves of challah that all you women make are safe. We all get to eat them. So, but they can't be offered as sacrifices. You shall not offer up in smoke any leaven or any honey as an offering by fire to Yahweh. As an offering of first fruits, you shall bring them to Yahweh, but they shall not ascend for a soothing aroma on the altar. And we know that with the first fruits offerings, those were usually brought in and they were eaten by the priest. So every grain offering of yours, verse 13, moreover, you shall season with salt, so that the salt of the covenant of your Elohim shall not be lacking from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. Also, if you bring a grain offering of early ripened things to Yahweh, you shall bring fresh heads of grain roasted in the fire, grits of new growth for the grain offering of your early ripened things. You shall then put oil on it and lay incense on it. It is a grain offering. The priest shall offer up in smoke its memorial portion, part of its grits and its oil, with all its incense, as an offering by fire to Yahweh. So this parched grain that people can bring in as an offering is just tossed in the fire and burned up. It's not eaten. So we have this principle established that if you're going to have an offering by fire, actual sacrifice, it cannot have leaven. So whatever you're offering to Yahweh in smoke must be unleavened, and it can't have honey in it. Of course, honey is a product of animals. It's when you get into the nitty gritty of it, it's almost kind of disgusting that it's basically bee spit. So I can sort of see where maybe he's going with on that. But even if we didn't know his reasoning, he said so. That's enough for me. He doesn't want honey in his offering. Okay, so now we're going to go to Judges chapter 6. Judges chapter 6. We're going to see another offering of bread here. Judges chapter. We're just kind of illustrating what the unleavened bread looks like as far as the principle of what it represents and how it related to the sacrifices and offerings. And then this will lead us into tomorrow when we start talking about leavened bread, and then the whole thing as it relates to the kingdom. So Judges chapter 6. Do I have the right? Judges 6. Oh, I'm in Joshua. Let's go a little bit. Joshua, Judges, Ruth. All right. Okay, this is Gideon. This is Gideon. The sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. You could just say that just all through the Bible. That's the Bible summed up. The sons of Israel did what was evil, and we just don't learn. And Yahweh gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. The power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which are in the mountains, and the caves and the strongholds. For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. So the Israelites were being heavily oppressed by their neighbors here, to the point to where they're destroying their crops. They're making it virtually impossible for them to raise their own food. Um, okay, so yeah, verse 5. For they would come up with their livestock in their tents. They would come in like locusts for number. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried to Yahweh. Now it came about when the sons of Israel cried to Yahweh on account of Midian, that Yahweh sent the prophet to the sons of Israel. And he said to them, Thus says Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, It was I who brought you up from Egypt, he's mentioning that again, and brought you out from the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors, and disposed them before you, and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am Yahweh your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not obeyed me. Then the angel of Yahweh came and sat under the oak. Didn't we just read about angels and Yahweh sitting under an oak? It just seems like this is a little familiar. The oak that is in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the vine press in order to save it from the Midianites. And this right here just always fascinates me. So here's Gideon. He's got this wine press, which was, as far as I understand, it was a kind of a little pit, like a stone type pit, where they would drop the grapes down in there, and then you would hop in there barefoot and you would stomp it and do all this, and it would have some kind of a little duct work that would let the juice flow out into a vat or something. But he's down in this pit and he's threshing out his wheat, okay, so that he's not seen by the Midianites. So I would classify what he's doing as living in fear, right? He's not out there boldly like, these Midianites, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and no, he's actually doing something that we would associate with fear. But the next thing is, the angel of Yahweh, verse 12, appeared to him and said to him, Yahweh is with you, O valiant warrior. As you're cowering in fear in this wine press, doing your, hiding from the Midianites, valiant warrior. And I wonder, like, if Yahweh looks at us that way, like if he sees our potential, like he sees how we deal with things around us, and often we operate in fear. But if he sees our potential as a valiant warrior, and he's just waiting for us to go full Gideon on the people around us. Like I don't know. Whenever I drive by like these huge like idols, statues, and things, I just kind of want to go Gideon, and I just want to like, can I get a little skid loader or something, and just knock it over? Oops, like I don't know. Anyway, so okay, verse 13. Then Gideon said to him, "Oh my master, if Yahweh is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" This is a sentiment that was brought up in the prayer request earlier. If he's with us, then why is all this stuff happening? And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, Did not Yahweh bring us up from Egypt? But now Yahweh has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Yahweh looked at him and said, Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? He said to him, Oh, master, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I'm the youngest in my father's house. But Yahweh said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man. So Gideon said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you and bring out my offering and lay it before you. And he said, I will remain until you return. Then Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and brought them out to him under the oak and presented them. So again, the bread of haste. Gideon doesn't have these awesome loaves of challah ready to go. So he's going to quick make some unleavened bread because he needs to present it as an offering here. The angel of Yahweh said to him, Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on the rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of Yahweh put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of Yahweh vanished from his sight. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of Yahweh, he said, Alas, O Yahweh Elohim, for now I have seen the angel of Yahweh face to face. And Yahweh said to him, Peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. And then, of course, he builds an altar, and then we have the whole golden fleece, or the whole the fleece thing, and we know what happens. He destroys the altar and everything. But the idea here is that he needs to make an offering here. He needs to do something fast, and he's being very reverent about it, and it happens to be unleavened bread. So that's just kind of a look, and we could do more scriptures on it, but for the sake of time, we're just going to keep it limited to that. That's what the bread offering looks like. If you're going to offer bread as an offering that's going to be burned in fire, like in all these cases, it must be unleavened. So now we're going to take a look. We're going to broaden this out just a little bit more, and we're going to look at the idea of manna as it relates to bread, because manna is a type of bread. We're going to go back to Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16. And I like this because for people that say, well, the Sabbath was for the Jews, the Sabbath wasn't even around until Mount Sinai. That's part of the Sinai covenant. We're in the new covenant now, so we don't have to keep Sabbath. Well, here he's showing them how to keep Sabbath before they even get to Mount Sinai. So Egypt chapter 16, Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16. Okay, so they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, or Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, Would that we had died by Yahweh's hand in the land of Egypt, after they had spent the past umpteen years trying to get out of Egypt. When we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate our bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them. So he's establishing that this idea of bread coming from heaven is a test for his people. Now we're going to see when we get into the New Testament a little bit later that boy, does that ever come to fruition. It becomes a definite test. So, okay, so where was it? It'll be a test. I lost it there. That I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Verse 5. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, At evening you will know that Yahweh has brought you out of the land of Egypt. When you read things like that, it's like, how did they not understand this? But then we look at them and we think, well, we're so much more spiritual. Maybe we would never, they're humans in a fallen state just like we are. So when I read these kinds of things, I try to give our Israelite forefathers as much grace as I could, because we could easily do the same thing if we were in the same circumstances. Okay, so at evening you will know that Yahweh has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of Yahweh, for he hears your grumblings. He hears your grumblings against Yahweh. And what are we, Moses and Aaron, that you grumble against us? Verse 8. Moses said, This will happen when Yahweh gives you meat to eat in the evening, and bread to the full in the morning. For Yahweh hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against Yahweh. Then Moses said to Aaron, Say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, Come near before Yahweh, for he has heard your grumblings. It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of Yahweh appeared in the cloud. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am Yahweh your Elohim. So it came about at evening that quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew evaporated, behold, on the surface of the wilderness there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, What is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, It is the bread which Yahweh has given you to eat. And the word manna actually means, what is it? That's what the word manna means. Now, we're talking about our forefathers here who were showing unbelief. I just have to illustrate real quick how unbelieving the world is. The world out there in large, and even within Bible scholars, there are even Bible scholars that cannot take this for what it says. The interpretation among these people is all these quail came in, they pooped all over the ground, because quails do that, they're birds. That dried up. And that's what the Israelites were eating the next morning. These fine flakes on the ground was actually quail poop. There are people who postulate that as a theory for what this means because they cannot accept the spiritual implications that somebody above us, as Joe was fond of saying, somebody very intelligent was able to orchestrate this. It has to be some natural explanation. So that's what we're up against when we look at the kingdoms of this world and how they interpret things to do with the kingdoms of Yahweh. Okay, so verse 16. This is what Yahweh has commanded. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer apiece, which is a nice tie-in because we're finishing up the counting of the omer. You shall take an omer apiece according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. The sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much and some little. Then they measured it with an omer. He who had gathered much had no excess, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. So this is people like those of us who have kids, we deal with this. It's time to get some dinner. I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. So they either don't get anything or they get very little. 2 hours later, they're starving to death, right? Or then you have kids who will just gorge themselves and bring like 3 plates fulls, and then 2 hours later they're in the bathroom throwing up, because we as human beings tend to be dumb, you know. And so these are people, he told them, take a day's worth, take your own what you need. And some people are not getting enough, some people are getting too much. Yahweh in his mercy is still correcting it. He's giving them just the right amount, even though they are being dumb, for lack of a better term, and not listening to him. So there's mercy right there. Okay, so verse 19 Moses said to them, let no man leave any of it until morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, every man as much as he should eat, but when the sun grew hot, it would melt. Now on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, this is what Yahweh meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance, a holy Sabbath to Yahweh. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning as Moses had ordered, and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to Yahweh. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. It came about on the 7th day that some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. So this whole idea, connecting this to the bread of heaven, this bread literally came from heaven. The people are given a double portion on the 6th day to get them through the 7th day, and they're told not to partake on the 7th day. Okay, we're going to read a scripture a little bit later in Amos that's going to be talking about this famine, not of bread, but a famine of the word. There's a time to gather the bread, there's a time to gather the word, and then it's going to be cut off. So he's giving us things like the Sabbath. He's giving us these holy convocations to prime us, hopefully. And if we will take that and internalize it and gain wisdom from it, we will be prepared for when that time comes. Okay, where were we? We were in verse 28. Then Yahweh said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, Yahweh has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you bread for 2 days on the 6th day. Remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey, which is interesting. I find that really interesting because with a bread offering, we are not to offer honey. But yet when Yahweh gives us bread, it tastes like honey. I don't know if there's anything to that or if that's just my mind connecting dots, but I just find that interesting. Then Moses said, this is what Yahweh has commanded. Let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer full of manna in it, and place it before Yahweh to be kept throughout your generations. As Yahweh commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, in case you didn't know, an omer is a tenth of an ephah. Moses was nice enough to put in there for us. Now, just a little sidebar. A few Sabbaths ago, we did a study with some of the youth about tips on studying the Bible, how to think critically, little nuggets of things that we can do. And this is one of those things that you can read right past, and you'll miss it if you don't slow down. They're supposed to take a jar of this basically and put it with the testimony. Well, we know that the testimony, that's the two tablets. At this point in time, Moses hasn't gone up to Sinai yet. They're not even at Sinai. There are no tablets. There's no Ark of the Covenant. So if we were to interpret this exactly like it says, they're going to go put it in an ark that doesn't exist with a testimony that doesn't exist yet. So this is a case with whoever wrote Exodus or whoever edited it or compiled it, however it ended up working, they were taking information from later when we know that the ark was made. And we know that, of course, once the ark was made, this jar they would have put in. But he's putting it back here because it connects thematically, even though chronologically it doesn't make sense. So that's just something to keep in mind. As we read through these accounts, not everything is chronological. There are some things, if it seems weird, if it seems out of place, it might have been put in that spot because the theme matches, and that's more important than the chronology. Okay, so we have the manna there. And the purpose, one of the purposes of bringing the manna from heaven is to teach us this principle of Shabbat. And we know from later when we get to the Ten Commandments and we get to the actual commandments about Shabbat that this is one of the signs that Yahweh gives to his people, between him and his people forever, not just until Calvary, forever. We're here observing that. Hallelujah. Okay, so we're going to go to Psalm 105 next. We're just going to read one verse out of there. You don't have to turn unless you just really feel like it. Psalm 105. We're going to read verse 40. And this is a really nice kind of summary of the Exodus. But Psalm 105:40. They asked, and he brought quail and satisfied them with the bread of heaven. Okay, so this is just to clarify the language here. I wanted to put this in here because David is calling the manna bread of heaven. Okay, so unless there's any dispute in our minds, this bread of heaven manna concept is there and it's established. Okay, and of course, if we had time, I would just read this whole psalm because it's amazing. But just to make that connection there, we'll go back to Exodus next, and this is where things really start to get interesting for me. I'm hopping around back and forth more than I normally do. Normally, I like to go left to right. So this is kind of unusual, but it's for a reason. We go to Exodus 25. Exodus 25, if I can get there. We're going to read verses 23 through 30. This is about the showbread. You shall take a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long and 1 cubit wide and 1.5 cubits high. This is when Moses is being given the instructions of the tabernacle, and he's told basically, I'm showing you this tabernacle in heaven, which we know from the book of Revelation, it says point blank there's a tabernacle in heaven. And he's told to model, to pattern this tabernacle on earth like the one he saw in heaven. Follow the pattern. And these are all the details about how that works and what it looks like in the big context here. Verse 24, you shall overlay it with pure gold, and you shall make a border around it. You shall make for it a rim of a handbreadth around it. You shall make a gold border for the rim around it. You shall make 4 gold rings for it, and put rings on the 4 corners which are on its 4 feet. The rings shall be close to the rim as holders for the poles to carry the table. You shall make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, so that with them the table may be carried. You shall make its dishes and its pans and its jars and its bowls with which to pour drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold. You shall set the bread of the presence, or the showbread, some translations say, on the table before me at all times. And we know from other scriptures that they were to make 12 loaves of this bread, one for each of the tribes. Now, where I think this is really interesting, when you look at that bread of the presence, when you look at that word for presence, it's panim or panah, depending on the context. When we read that Moses spoke to Yahweh face to face, panim al panim, you can literally translate this as bread of the face, or even bread of the person. So I can't help but have this mental image, like our Catholic brothers and sisters out there, they get all